Hey guys, tonight we slip on our frostbitten boots. Well, if you had boots. And tumble back over 1,000 years to the icy, wind-blasted coastlines of Viking Age Norway. It's 870 CE, the middle of nowhere and the middle of winter. The air is sharp enough to slice bread. The pine trees are crusted in snow and you're waking up flat on your back, nestled into a patch of moss so frozen it might as well be stone. There's a raven cackling in the distance, which feels like a bad omen, and your breath fogs in front of you in big dramatic puffs like you're a dragon on a budget. Your hands are numb. Your toes? Let's not talk about your toes. You squint toward the gray horizon where fjords cut through the landscape like jagged scars, and you realize something chilling, pun fully intended. You are alone, unarmed, barefoot, and you haven't had coffee in over a millennium. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere cold, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know who's also shivering. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, you push yourself upright, groaning as your joints creak like they've skipped several centuries of modern medicine. Your body isn't used to this timeline, and neither is your stomach, which growls ominously. But before you can think of food, you need to get moving. Staying still in this cold is the fastest way to turn into a tragic exhibit in some future museum. You stomp your feet, more out of desperation than technique, and immediately realize that your soles are dangerously exposed. Welcome to Viking. Survival beginner's mode. No socks, no shoes, no problem, except the problem is frostbite. Your surroundings are breathtaking, in that you forgot to breathe for 5 seconds because the view is so good way, and also the you're literally freezing way. Jagged mountains loom in every direction. There's a wisp of smoke in the distance. Could be a village. Could be a fire. Could be a dragon. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly feared sea serpents, or if they just got really creative when explaining shipwrecks. You start walking, limping really, across a patchy trail of frozen earth and brittle grass. The landscape crunches underfoot like stale cereal. You pass a half-frozen stream. Your reflection staring back is wild-eyed and covered in what can only be described as survival chic. Your hair is windswept in the bad way, and your skin has the weathered charm of someone who's used animal fat as moisturizer. You come across a log, partly covered in snow, and you pry it apart with cold, stiff fingers to find insects. Viking life hack. A handful of beetles is technically protein. You eat 2. You regret both. Still, it's that or chewing on bark, and you don't have the jaw strength for decorative pine. Trudging onward, you finally spot it. A humble Viking settlement tucked in a narrow valley. Low, turf-roofed huts sag under the weight of snow. Smoke curls from central hearths, and a couple of goats stare at you like you're not going to last till sunset. They're probably right. As you approach, your arrival does not go unnoticed. A trio of kids throw snowballs at you, one of which contains a surprising amount of gravel. You take it like a champ. A woman with thick braids and a fur-lined cloak eyes you from behind a basket of fish heads. She's not impressed. No one here is impressed. You look like you just failed a nature documentary audition. Still, survival is all about adapting. So you smile awkwardly, wave with a hand so numb it barely qualifies as attached, and walk right into the heart of the village. A man with a beard long enough to trip over stops you. He says something in Old Norse that you definitely don't understand, but you nod anyway and point at your feet. He laughs, a deep, belly-rolling kind of laugh, and gestures toward one of the huts. Either you're about to get a place to sleep, or you've been adopted as village entertainment. Honestly, either would be fine. Inside the hut, warmth hits you like a blanket made of soup. The hearth blazes in the center, smoke trailing up through a carved-out vent in the roof. The walls are timber and turf. The smell is equal parts wood smoke and goat, and you're suddenly surrounded by a family that treats your barefoot arrival as only mildly strange. The oldest woman hands you a mug of something steaming. It tastes like burnt bark and mushrooms, but it's warm, so you don't complain. You sit by the fire, slowly regaining feeling in your extremities. Someone tosses you a woolen blanket. That's seen better centuries. Your first survival milestone, not freezing to death before dinner. And as the family settles back into their evening routine, carving tools, repairing boots, stirring stew with suspicious floating items, you start to learn. You watch how they layer clothes, how they place stones around the hearth to trap heat, how they dry fish by the fire and store dried moss for toilet paper. Yes, moss. Nature's most underappreciated wipe. You also start to grasp how brutal their lives are. A child scratches at lice with a carved bone comb. The stew smells of herring and desperation. And yet, there's laughter. There's singing. There's even a toddler gnawing on what looks like a sheep knuckle, having the time of his tiny Viking life. Despite the hardship, they endure. And now, you have to do the same. Because tomorrow, the real work begins. Finding food, crafting clothes, and maybe, just maybe, earning your place in this cold, ancient world. Tonight, though, you drift towards sleep with the smell of smoke in your hair, one sock half knitted in your lap, and a goat quietly judging you from across the room. You wake before dawn, mouth dry, skin tight from sleeping too close to the fire. It's still dark outside, black as the inside of a cow's stomach, which, ironically, you might be eating for lunch. Your borrowed wool blanket is itchy, smells like it was washed in despair, and somehow you're grateful for it. The hut's other inhabitants are already stirring, clanking wooden bowls, stoking the hearth, and muttering in grumpy Old Norse. The cold greets you the moment you shrug off your blanket. It sneaks up through the floorboards, slithers around your ankles, and hugs your spine like a vengeful ghost. You need food, real food. That meager handful of beetles from yesterday barely counted as a snack, let alone sustenance. The good news is, the Vikings do eat breakfast. The bad news is what they call breakfast. You step outside into a world glazed in frost. The mountains are bruised blue in the pre-dawn light, and smoke snakes up from several chimneys like lazy ghosts. A dog barks at you. You're not sure if it's greeting or threat. Either way, it follows you to the village edge, where a woman with an armload of fish guts gestures you toward a communal cooking pit. You approach slowly, hoping something, anything, smells edible. What hits your nostrils is complex. A blend of old cabbage, wood ash, and something suspiciously pickled. A man with a face like a carved turnip hands you a bowl of slop. It's a porridge made from barley and water, flavored, if you can call it that, with wild herbs, salt, and fish stock. No sugar, no milk, no hope. You sit on a stump and take a bite. It's thick, like cement with dreams, thick, a lumpy, gelatinous mass that seems determined to escape your spoon. You force it down with the grim resolve of a reality show contestant. It tastes like sadness wrapped in algae. A nearby boy gleefully eats his portion with his fingers. You're not sure if he's a genius or a gremlin. After the porridge comes the dried fish. It's chewy, sharp, and oddly sweet. Kind of like eating jerky that's been left out in the sun for a week and then stepped on. You nibble carefully, teeth already aching from the effort. This fish, likely cod or herring, has been air-dried and smoked in layers of seaweed and pine bark. Historians still argue whether the Vikings actually enjoyed this, or if they just got used to the constant mouth splinters. You wash it all down with a drink that makes your eyebrows sweat. It's sour milk, possibly fermented, possibly cursed. Called Skyr, it's technically a yogurt. But this batch seems particularly aggressive. It sours your mood before it even hits your stomach. With food, or at least calories in your belly, you join a small group heading out toward the fjord. Today's goal, more food. Forage, fish, or faint. Those are your options. You're handed a crude spear and a woven basket. Spear for fish. Basket for whatever else doesn't scream when you pick it. The path is slick with frost, and the rocks are unforgiving. You shuffle like a pensioner on roller skates, trying not to break an ankle. Down by the water, the wind picks up. The fjord stretches out in steel-gray ripples, churning gently against black pebbles and kelp. The salt air stings your nose, but it's also the freshest thing you've smelled in hours. You try fishing. Try is the key word. You jab the spear into the water, eyes squinting for movement. Nothing. A boy next to you catches 3 in the time it takes you to nearly fall in. Your technique is lacking, your aim questionable, and your patience non-existent. Still, after the 5th try, you actually spear something. Possibly a fish, possibly a very angry eel. Either way, it counts. The group moves along the shoreline, gathering mussels, scraping seaweed, and checking traps. One elderly woman plucks a fat slug from beneath a rock and hums approvingly. You follow suit, trying not to think about texture. Lunch is gathered, such as it is. Mostly fish, seaweed, and a couple of seabird eggs so fragile you carry them like they're made of dreams. A young girl hands you a flat cake of dried moss. It's not for eating, thankfully. It's to pad your crude shoes, which currently consist of bundled grass tied with sinew. Congratulations. You're officially a fashion icon of the desperate. By mid-morning, you're back in the village. The food is laid out, sorted, smoked, or boiled in a giant iron cauldron. The resulting stew is marginally better than breakfast, mostly because you're hungrier. It has chunks of dried cod, wild onion, moss, and possibly, is that a mushroom? Risky. A local whispers that it's called sopgrout, a hearty soup porridge hybrid that sounds more hopeful than it tastes. Still, it warms your hands. You overhear 2 elders bickering about last season's turnip harvest. One swears it was the goats, the other blames frost spirits. This is where that quirky detail comes in. Many Viking communities believed in landvetter, spirit guardians of the land. Anger them, and your crops die. Keep them happy, and maybe, just maybe, you get edible vegetables this year. You help carry bundles of food back to the longhouse storage pits, shallow, lined with straw, and packed with ice or snow depending on the season. You learn that food, preservation is life here. Salting, smoking, drying, anything to stretch a summer catch through a winter night. As evening rolls in, you're sent to help prepare supper. You peel turnips using a stone scraper that feels like it was designed by someone who hated hands. You're allowed to stir the pot for 2 whole minutes before being gently shooed away by a cook with zero faith in your culinary instincts. Dinner is more of the same. Barley, fish, more mossy stew, and, just to keep things spicy, a slice of dried liver. You chew slowly, thoughtfully, like someone pretending to enjoy jazz. You notice others dipping dried seaweed in animal fat, like Viking potato chips. You try it. You regret it. By firelight, the community gathers to eat, tell stories, and air grievances. One man complains that his neighbor's goat keeps eating his laundry. Another claims his cousin saw a draugr, a sort of undead Viking zombie, lurking in the woods. He's met with polite nods and one overly dramatic gasp. You file that away under reasons not to leave the village at night. You end the night feeling full, relatively speaking, and slightly more connected to this strange, rugged world. You didn't die. You even caught a fish. And though your stomach is still reconsidering several decisions, you've eaten like a true Viking. Tomorrow, though, clothing. Because unless you plan on spending the rest of your days dressed in moss and sadness, you're going to need pants. You wake to the sound of metal clanking, sharp, rhythmic, like someone is forging a headache directly into your ears. The fire's gone out, your blanket has migrated halfway across the floor, and your left leg has fallen asleep so deeply it might have reincarnated. Outside, the sun has risen reluctantly, casting a pale, slushy light over the village. Your first thought is that your stomach is oddly silent. Your second is that your clothes, or lack thereof, are still wildly inappropriate for this climate. Today, you're on a quest for garments, real ones, not just itchy drapery and wishful thinking. Because as much as you've enjoyed wrapping yourself in layers of regret and damp animal smells, it's time to look less like a cursed scarecrow and more like a functioning member of this frosty society. You step out into the crisp morning, your makeshift shoes squishing softly as the melting frost seeps into the moss padding. A woman with braids and permanently raised eyebrows beckons you toward a low turf hut, with bundles of animal pelts hanging outside. Inside, it's warm, dim, and smells strongly of wet leather and sheep ambition. She doesn't speak a word as she appraises your frame with the intensity of someone choosing the right log for a funeral pyre. She pulls out a tunic, coarse wool, dyed a murky brownish green, possibly the least flattering color on record. Still, it's sturdy, long enough to cover your knees, and smells only mildly of fermented goat. Next come the trousers, or rather, tubes of thick wool stitched with what appears to be sinew. They're laced up the sides like some sort of prehistoric yoga pants. Putting them on is a workout in itself. You grunt, you flail, you lose a little dignity. But eventually, you're clothed in something that feels more appropriate for frost, and less like a medieval dare. The finishing touch is a thick cloak, fastened with a simple bronze brooch. You feel 10% warmer and 70% more. Respected. A boy offers you a belt made of braided horsehair. It's scratchy, but it does the job. Functional fashion. The Viking aesthetic. As you admire your new outfit, read, tolerate it, you learn about the process behind Viking clothing. Wool comes from sheep, obviously, but not the fluffy, happy ones you're used to seeing in cartoons. These are battle-hardened, Scandinavian sheep with attitudes. The wool is sheared, cleaned, spun, and woven on vertical looms. Linen for summer wear is made from flax, though only wealthier families could afford to wear it regularly. You are not one of those families. Dyes come from plants, mosses, and some truly creative sources. You're told with a wink that certain yellows come from boiled onion skins, and other, less savory liquids. Yes, urine. Historically accurate, scientifically effective, and emotionally scarring. As for leather, that's a whole other journey. Animal hides are scraped, stretched, soaked in brain matter or fermented barley, then dried and worked by hand. The smell? A symphony of pungency. But the result? Durable clothing, boots, and tools. Historians still argue whether the tanning process was shared communally or reserved for specialists. Either way, you now understand why every Viking smells like a barn on a hot day. Your next stop is with a group of women spinning wool into thread. They're using drop spindles, simple tools that look like wooden tops on sticks. It's mesmerizing. The thread twists and loops between fingers in a slow, steady dance. You're handed a spindle. You drop it immediately, twice. They laugh, but it's the nice kind of laugh, the one that says, "You're terrible at this, but we like your effort." You spend a good hour spinning, twisting, and eventually producing a few pathetic feet of uneven yarn. Still, it's something. A small step toward self-reliance, or at least toward not having to borrow socks from toddlers. Later, you're shown how to patch garments. Wool is forgiving. It felts when damp, so small holes can be repaired just by rubbing wool fibers together with spit and stubbornness. Larger tiers require needlework. The needle is made of bone. The thread is animal sinew. You prick your finger 3 times and swear once under your breath, just quietly enough to keep things PG-13. One elder shows you a shirt embroidered with intricate knots and spirals. It's not just decoration, it's storytelling. Some symbols represent protection, some status, some clan affiliation. You point at one that looks like a very angry duck. She informs you with a completely straight face that it's a stylized raven. You nod sagely. Angry duck, raven, same energy. Footwear is its own beast, literally. Viking shoes are made of stitched leather, often stuffed with straw or moss for insulation. They're not waterproof, not comfortable, and they wear out fast. You're handed a pair that feels like damp bags tied to your feet. But hey, at least they match. By midday, you've assembled your outfit. Tunic, trousers, belt, cloak, and boots. It's not glamorous, but it's warm. Mostly. You walk back to the village center, now clomping instead of squishing. People nod at you. One person calls you not useless. That's high praise here. Clothing isn't just for warmth, it's identity. Married women wear scarves or elaborate headbands. Warriors sport arm rings and heavy cloaks. Children wear hand-me-downs stitched with care. And elders often display embroidered tales of past glories. Your outfit says, "I've only just arrived, but I'm trying very hard not to die." That evening, you help prepare strips of hide for future boots. You scrape, oil, and stretch them over wooden molds. It's grueling work, but your hands are starting to harden. Your back to ache in that oddly satisfying, "I did something real today" way. As you sit by the fire, threading sinew through a pair of damp mittens, a man tells the tale of a mythical tailor who stitched his clothing from clouds and shadows. He laughs, then mimes sewing with lightning. You laugh too, even though your fingers are numb and you've stabbed yourself with a bone needle twice. You sleep that night bundled in your new gear, body warm, feet less tragic, and your spirit, dare we say, just a touch more Viking. You wake up feeling almost comfortable. A dangerous thing. Comfort leads to hope, and hope, well, that's how people end up volunteering for things like, "Let's sail across an uncharted sea in a wooden bathtub." But for now, wrapped in wool and leather, you're warm enough to entertain the possibility of survival. Until someone shouts that you're on wood chopping duty. Chopping wood sounds wholesome, rustic even. You imagine a scenic log pile, a gentle forest, maybe a bird tweeting overhead. What you actually get is an axe with a chipped blade, a frozen stump, and a growing suspicion that your arms are made of pudding. The trees are a short trek away, through frost-covered fields, and past a frozen bog where something definitely dead is poking up through the ice. A few others walk with you, chatting about the coming weather and the relative merits of birch versus pine. You nod and try to look like someone who has strong opinions on bark texture. When you reach the tree line, you're handed your own log, a big chunk of timber that weighs roughly the same as your regret, and told to warm up. You swing the axe, it bounces. You swing again. A tiny splinter comes off. By the 10th swing, you've barely made a dent and have invented 3 new curse words that are still technically PG-13. A grizzled man named Rurik takes pity on you with a single, clean stroke. He splits a log clean in half. Show off. You mutter something about just loosening it up, and go back to whacking at your own log like it owes you money. Eventually, you manage to split one piece. Your arms are jelly, your shoulders scream, but there's a primitive pride glowing somewhere beneath your frostbitten exterior. The thing is, chopping wood isn't optional in this world. It's fuel, and fuel means life. The hearth fires never go out for long, because once they do, the cold doesn't just creep in, it pounces. You gather and split what you can, stack it in bundles, and haul it back toward the village like a very tired sled dog with slightly better shoes. At the longhouse, you help feed the fire. Thick logs go into the heart of the pit. Thinner branches are used for kindling. Smoke curls up through a central hole in the roof, darkening the timbers and your lungs in equal measure. You cough, wipe soot from your nose, and try not to imagine what your lungs look like after a few winters of this. Still, there's something calming about the fire. The way it cracks and hisses, the smell of burning pine resin, the soft orange flicker against the walls, it all feels almost cozy. Until someone casually mentions you're on latrine trench duty next. Before we get there, though, you learn how deeply fire is woven into Viking life. It's the hearth, the heart of the home. Meals are cooked over it, stories are told beside it. In some sagas, fire spirits, or even the gods themselves, are said to dwell within the flames. Historians still argue whether specific rituals were used to speak to these spirits, or if that's just poetic embellishment. Either way, you try not to offend the fire as you add another log. Once the heat's going strong, you help prepare pine pitch, an essential item for sealing boats, waterproofing boots, and, today, sticking a broken wooden comb back together. The process involves melting tree sap, mixing it with charcoal and animal fat, and stirring until it becomes a tar-like goo. It smells like a forest lit itself on fire, and then got doused with bacon grease. As the goo cools, a young girl dares you to touch it. You decline, wisely. She does it anyway, and peels it off her fingers with a delighted squeal. A few others join in, turning it into an impromptu craft session. You fashion a sad little medallion shaped like a lopsided hammer, your best attempt. At Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. It breaks in half before it cools. You wear it anyway. It's symbolic. Now it's time for the next great adventure: waste management. The latrine trench is located a good walk from the main houses, because no one wants to live downwind of that decision. It's literally a ditch. A shallow one, lined with stones and surrounded by reeds. There's a wooden platform with a hole in it, and an old bucket of lye-soaked moss for wiping. You quickly realize why Viking hygiene habits are the stuff of legend, and not always in a good way. You're handed a shovel and instructed to stir. You don't ask questions. You don't want answers. You just dig, grimace, and do your best to breathe through your mouth. Quirky tidbit time. Despite popular belief, Vikings did value cleanliness. They bathed weekly, far more often than most of medieval Europe. They used tweezers, combs, ear spoons, yes, tiny spoons for scooping earwax, and even toothpicks made of bone. Archaeologists have found hundreds of grooming tools, suggesting that even if they lived rough, they tried to look sharp. Still, the smell of the trench is enough to peel paint off a shield. As the day winds down, you finally get a break. You sit with a small group carving firewood into kindling and sharing a drink of mead. Honey wine. The Viking treat of champions. It's surprisingly sweet, warming your throat and making the fire seem just a little brighter. You're told it's a weak batch, but judging by the giggling from one corner, it still packs enough punch to make you forget your shoulder pain. One elder shares a legend of Logi, the fire giant who could consume anything. In a famous tale, he defeats Loki in an eating contest, not by trickery, but because he is literal flame. The others nod, not because they necessarily believe it, but because stories are currency here. You offer up your own, the tragic saga of the axe that bounced. It earns a few chuckles. Later, back in your sleeping spot, you stare at the fire's dying embers. Your arms ache, your face is smudged with soot, and your new tunic smells like smoke and faint despair. But you're warmer than yesterday, slightly. Stronger and, dare we say it, just a smidge prouder. You fall asleep thinking of tomorrow's chores, building something maybe, or sailing, or, heaven forbid, goat wrangling. You awake with the full body stiffness of someone who's either slept on a pile of firewood or fought a moose in your dreams, possibly both. Your arms complain, your back sighs, even your eyebrows feel tired. But there's no time to wallow, because today, you're building a house. Or at least trying not to ruin one while pretending you know what you're doing. The air outside is sharp and wet, the kind of cold that finds your joints and moves in permanently. But there's excitement in the village this morning. A new family is arriving, and a fresh longhouse is going up. It's all hands on deck. Experienced craftsmen, bored teenagers, and you, the walking liability. You shuffle toward the work site, where a rectangular frame of heavy timbers has already been set. The skeleton of the house looks more like a disassembled ship stuck into the ground, which honestly isn't far off. Vikings were obsessed with woodcraft. Their homes, like their boats, were feats of practical genius held together by pegs, joints, and the occasional prayer. Your first task is to help repair the roof beams. They're massive, rough-hewn logs that need to be hauled up and placed like ribs over the top of the frame. You join a team using wooden rollers and levers, a technique older than breakfast cereal, to inch the log into place. It's teamwork, at its finest, or at least its sweatiest. As you help steady one end, someone yells, "Duck!" You do. Just in time to avoid being bonked by a swinging beam that decides gravity is still undefeated. You clutch your head and mutter something about hazard pay, which earns a hearty laugh. You're getting good at physical comedy, if nothing else. The roofing process is a messy miracle. Strips of turf are stacked atop a layer of birch bark, which itself sits on wooden slats. Why turf? Because it's insulating, abundant, and, when soaked properly, becomes heavy enough to resist windstorms and nosy animals. The end result is a cozy, grass-topped home that looks like it was sneezed out by Mother Nature. You help unroll the bark. It's flaky and smells earthy, like the forest's leftover receipts. Someone shows you how to layer it so water doesn't leak through. Think fish scales, they say. You nod. Even as you work, the rhythm of the build becomes oddly meditative. Hammer, wedge, repeat. The tools are simple. Stone hammers, iron axes, wooden mallets. But the techniques are anything but. Mortise and tenon joints hold the beams together without nails. Pegs made of oak are driven in tight to secure planks. Historians still argue whether these methods were passed down orally or through apprentice-style systems. Either way, it works, and it's beautiful in its no-frills brutality. You pause to wipe your forehead and admire the almost house. Someone hands you a smoked fish. It's your lunch. It's also your motivation to not collapse. You eat it standing, up, trying not to think too hard about where the bones end and the crunch begins. The quirky part? Some Viking homes had built-in benches lining the walls, not for comfort, but for warmth. People sat and slept along the sides, often huddled under shared furs. The center of the house held the hearth, and the roof's smoke hole doubled as both ventilation and celestial telescope. On clear nights, stars peeked through. On bad nights, rain peeked through harder. You help dig shallow trenches around the base of the home, where wooden planks will help shield against drafts and rodents with social ambitions. Your hands blister. Your knees ache. A goat escapes nearby and has to be coaxed down from someone's roof with a turnip. You wonder briefly if you imagined that part. Nope. Definitely a goat. Later in the day, someone carves a decorative dragon head into one of the roof beams. It's not just art, it's protection. Norse belief holds that such carvings ward off spirits and bad luck. You trace the swirls with your finger, feeling the grooves cut deep into the grain. It's rough, primitive, and weirdly elegant. As the sun dips low, shadows stretch over the construction site. The roof is half finished, the walls are sturdy, and the family whose house it is brings out a jug of ale to share. It's warm, bitter, and tastes like wet bread and old apples. But you're too thirsty to care. You sit by the hearth with others, covered in dirt and splinters, passing around mugs and sharing stories. One man boasts that his house once stood through 3 winters without needing repairs. Another claims to have caught a troll sneaking into his goat shed. "What did it want?" someone asks. "To borrow my tools," he answers. Everyone nods, solemnly, as if that makes perfect sense. You're learning something important here. These people build with intention, not just homes, but lives. The houses aren't perfect, but they're strong, warm, and built by many hands. Each notch in a beam, each layer of turf, holds the weight of effort, cooperation, and a little desperation. You curl up by the fire as night closes in, soot smudged on your cheek, and the smell of wood smoke clinging to your cloak. Outside, the house you helped build is already being claimed by wind and weather, testing its metal. But inside, there's warmth, and laughter, and more fish than seems necessary. You dream of hammers swinging, turf stacking itself, and goats that talk in riddles, probably the mead's fault. The first thing you hear is someone arguing with a chicken. The second thing you feel is a large, wet nose nuzzling your arm. You crack open one eye. Yep, it's a sheep, in the longhouse, staring at you like you owe it money. Welcome to Viking animal husbandry. Today, you're not building or chopping or trench stirring. You're learning how to keep livestock alive through a subarctic winter with nothing but common sense, good luck, and a tolerance for smell. Your guide for the day is a sharp-eyed woman named Fridas, who's been wrangling goats since she could walk, and can apparently communicate with them using nothing but scowls. She waves you over without much ceremony and points at the animals, clustered in the back of the longhouse. Pigs, goats, a couple of chickens and 2 cows are huddled in straw, steaming slightly in the cold air. Yes, inside the house. This is normal. You wrinkle your nose. It's a scent. A symphony of earthy, musk and poop with hints of wet hay and despair. You try not to breathe too deeply. Fridas hands you a rough broom and tells you to start mucking. No, not some charming side job like brushing a pony's mane. Mucking means shoveling manure into a compost pit out back, layered with straw and ash for insulation. It's back-breaking work that quickly becomes a battle of balance, timing, and mental disassociation. You scoop, you dump, you try not to gag when something squelches. Still, there's a method here. Manure becomes fertilizer. Ash from the hearth absorbs moisture and odor, and straw helps keep everything from freezing into one solid block of regret. Some historians still argue whether Viking composting systems were deliberately engineered or just evolved from sheer necessity. Either way, it works. After the mucking comes feeding. You help distribute handfuls of dried hay, turnips, and, oddly, seaweed. Turns out, Coastal Viking farms sometimes harvested seaweed as winter fodder. It's rich in nutrients and slightly less terrible than it sounds. The goats love it. One of them tries to nibble your cloak. Then there's the chickens. They strut around like they own the place, pecking your boots and clucking disapproval. You gather their eggs, delicately because they peck hard, and discover a clutch nestled in someone's discarded tunic. You don't ask questions. As the morning wears on, Fridas teaches you how to milk a goat. It's an exercise in patience, coordination, and avoiding the business end of a twitchy hoof. You kneel beside the goat, try not to make eye contact, and follow instructions. Squeeze, not pull. Rhythm is everything. And don't take it personally when the goat looks at you like it's deeply unimpressed. The milk, surprisingly, is warm and sweet. You help strain it through cloth into a wooden bucket, and learn it'll be made into cheese later. Soft, tangy stuff that keeps for weeks when stored in cool clay pots. One of the boys boasts he can survive a whole winter on goat cheese and dried fish. Judging by his complexion, he might have tried. By midday, you're herding animals outside to stretch their legs. You shuffle along with the pigs, trying to keep them from wandering too far. They snort happily and dive into the snow, rooting for long-lost acorns or old boots. The cows move more slowly, their breath puffing into the air like smoke signals. Thug. Quirky surprise? Vikings named their animals, not just pets, livestock too. Runestones and sagas sometimes mention gray cow or little horn. Some were believed to bring luck, others to be omens. Fridas introduces you to a particularly grumpy sheep called Thunder. You try to pet Thunder. Thunder does not appreciate your affection. As evening approaches, you help bring everyone back inside. The animals return to their corners, warming. The longhouse with their collective body heat. It's cozy, in a slightly alarming petting zoo kind of way. The smell is still there, but you've stopped noticing. You sit near the hearth again, sipping a warm broth made from milk, herbs, and something vaguely turnip-adjacent. Around you, others talk of spring, of lambing season, planting, and whether this year's barley will survive. You ask about hunting, expecting tales of glory. Instead, you're told with a shrug, it's useful, but risky. A single injured hunter can doom a household. Livestock is safer, more reliable. Besides, when you've spent a season caring for a goat, you might be less inclined to see it as dinner. Well, maybe. You help clean up, scattering fresh straw and adjusting wooden pens. Fridas nods approvingly and tosses you a chunk of hard cheese. You eat it with chilled fingers, sitting beside a snoring pig. Somewhere, a chicken lays an egg, with a triumphant squawk. The longhouse settles. The animals breathe slow and deep. You lie down close to the hearth again, wrapped in your wool cloak, the weight of the day melting into your bones. Outside, the cold gnaws at the walls, but inside, the steady presence of beasts and fire keeps it at bay. You fall asleep with the faint sensation of hooves nudging your leg, and the realization that, for now, you're part of this strange, warm-smelling herd. You wake to the sound of ice cracking in the distance, sharp and echoing, like the land itself is stretching after a long sleep. The sky outside is still pale blue, but there's movement. Figures huddled in cloaks, axes slung over shoulders, sleds being packed. Today you're going foraging, winter foraging, which is sort of like grocery shopping. If the store is several miles away, snow-covered, and full of things that can kill you. You scarf down a hunk of barley bread, tie your fur-lined boots tighter, and follow the small group heading into the forest. There's Fridas again, leading the way with her axe and her glare. She's joined by two older men who seem to communicate mostly through grunts and eyebrow twitches, and a boy of maybe 12 who carries a bundle of rope like it's the crown jewels. The goal? Firewood, edible roots, maybe some birch bark, and, if the gods are feeling generous, game. Nothing fancy. Just survival. One frostbitten toe at a time. The snow is deep, packed hard under your boots, and the trees loom above like silent judges. You stick close to the group, eyes peeled. Viking forests in winter are beautiful in that haunted fairy tale way. Moss-covered stumps, ice crystals catching the light, and the occasional suspicious rustling that might be a rabbit, or something much larger. First stop, deadwood. Fallen branches make for excellent kindling, and you quickly learn the difference between dry, snappable twigs and damp ones that smoke worse than a campfire gone wrong. You gather armfuls, stack them onto the sled, and feel weirdly proud when Freydis doesn't yell at you. Then come the roots. One of the old men points to a half-frozen patch near a tree base. He chips at the ground with a narrow spade and pulls out something that looks like a hairy turnip. Angelica, he says. Good in soup, good for your stomach. You dig beside him and find your own. It smells sharp and green, and a little like wet celery. Historians still argue whether Viking foraging knowledge was passed mostly through oral tradition or refined through experience and trade. Whatever the case, these people know what won't kill them, and that's good enough for you. As you wander deeper, someone gestures at a tree trunk covered in lichen. Reindeer moss, they say. Technically not moss, and reindeer do eat it. It's edible, for humans too, if boiled. Twice, and scraped, and maybe prayed over. It's emergency food, but you pocket some anyway. Who knows what kind of day it's going to be. The boy suddenly stops and points to a line of tracks in the snow. Delicate, almost dainty. Hair, he whispers. Freydis nods and motions for silence. You all crouch behind a log, and she begins to set a snare with a practiced grace that looks like she's just braiding hair. The rope goes taut, a bit of bait is tucked in, and the waiting begins. You don't catch anything this time, but you do get a short lecture on trap making. Loops, bait types, snow concealment, and just as importantly, how not to accidentally trap yourself. That part seems vital. The sun creeps lower, and the forest shifts from crisp daylight to twilight blur. You gather birch bark, peeling it gently so the tree survives, and some pine resin for kindling. The quirky tidbit of the day? Viking children used chunks of dried birch bark as writing tablets. Carve letters with a bone stylus, and boom, your first homework assignment. On the way back, someone spots a hollow log and reaches in, pulling out a stash of mushrooms, dried, hidden away, like a forest bank deposit. You blink. Freydis shrugs. We hide some in the fall, just in case. You trudge back with sleds loaded and cheeks windburned. legs heavy but mind buzzing with a weird satisfaction. You didn't just walk through a forest, you read it. Like a story written in bark, tracks, and the occasional chewed twig. Back at the longhouse. The hall is unpacked. Firewood is stacked. Roots and herbs are laid out to dry near the hearth. The resin goes into a little clay pot near the tools. Someone sharpens a knife using a bit of sandstone. You realize everything has a place, a purpose. Nothing is wasted. That night, dinner is a thin stew with bits of fish, angelica root, and a sprinkling of dried mushroom. It's not going to win any Michelin stars, but it's hot, filling, and tastes of effort. You slurp it down beside the fire and even accept seconds. Someone starts telling a story about a man who got lost in the woods and was rescued by a white fox that turned out to be a spirit. Everyone listens quietly. The boy with the rope dozes off, his head against a goat. The older men sip their ale and occasionally nod as if to say, "Yup, that tracks." You think about the snare you helped set, the bark in your pocket, the taste of pine in the cold air. Foraging isn't just food gathering, it's mindfulness in motion. It's knowing your land well enough to hear it whisper secrets beneath the snow. You stretch out near the fire, limbs aching in that oddly satisfying way, and fall asleep to the soft crackle of bark, the deep breathing of animals, and the knowledge that, for today, you've earned your place by the hearth. The wind has teeth this morning. You step outside, wrapped in layers of wool and fur, and the gusts slap your face like an angry god. Your eyelashes freeze halfway through blinking. Somewhere, someone is cursing into a scarf, and honestly, you get it. Today's task is not glamorous. It's not dramatic or heroic. It's maintenance. The unsexy, life-saving grind that keeps a Viking homestead functioning. Roofs need patching. Tools need repairing. Fires need tending. And yes, the outhouse needs attention. You start with the roof. The longhouse is covered in thick sod layers over a timber frame. During warmer months it grows grass like a hobbit mansion, but now it's crusted with frost and prone to leaks. You follow a man named Rold up a ladder that creaks under your combined weight, and wonder if today's the day gravity wins. Rold doesn't speak much. He just points to the weak spots and grunts. You're not sure if he likes you or is quietly planning to throw you off the roof. Either way, you get to work. You lift sections of frozen sod, replace waterlogged straw stuffing, and patch with new turf dug from a half-buried pile. It's cold, muddy, and involves more bending than you expected. Your gloves become damp. Your toes go numb. But the wind doesn't get in anymore, and that feels like victory. Historians still argue whether Viking sod roofing techniques varied greatly between regions or followed a relatively uniform tradition across settlements. Judging by this experience, you suspect regional differences may have included how often people cried while fixing them. Next, you head inside to tackle the tools. Axes, knives, sickles, everything dull, rusted, or cracked has been lined up like patients in a waiting room. You're handed a whetstone and taught the rhythm of sharpening. Circular motions, steady pressure, don't rush it. It's oddly meditative, like you're whispering the blade back into usefulness. You inspect a cracked wooden shaft and get walked through, replacing it with a fresh piece of ash wood. Carve the notch, align the head, wedge it tight. Not bad for a first try. You even get a nod from a wiry old man who smells like tree sap and disapproval. The quirky moment? Someone hands you a bundle of what looks like stringy black fabric. You're told it's twisted animal sinew, used as thread for binding tool handles, or sewing leather. You stretch it between your fingers and wonder who first thought. You know what would hold this together? The leftover parts of a deer. Then comes the fire keeping. Sounds simple. It's not. Fire doesn't just stay lit because you want it to. It requires feeding, breathing room, and just the right balance of materials. You learn how to bank coals with ash overnight, how to restart them using dry bark and a bit of puffed breath. You burn your thumb once, okay? Twice. But eventually you get it. The fire obeys attention, not hope. And then, at last, the part no one wants. The outhouse. Now, calling it an outhouse is generous. It's more like a partially walled-off pit with a plank to sit on and a very unpleasant draft. You approach with a shovel, a handful of straw, and a strong sense of betrayal. Cleaning it is every bit as bad as you feared. Frozen waste doesn't smell better, it just crunches. You scoop, layer with ash and straw, and try not to make eye contact with anything. Still, this too has a logic. Waste is composted over time in a pit further away from the house. It'll be used on the fields, come spring. And here's your fringe fact of the day. Some Viking settlements used communal latrine areas heated by stones. Basically the world's most rustic sauna bathroom combo. Apparently, warmth was a higher priority than privacy. Can't say you're jealous. After the muck and tools, you're handed a task that almost feels like a treat. Oiling leather. You sit by the hearth with strips of boots, belts, and sheaths. You rub in rendered animal fat, softened into a balm. Working it into every crease, the smell is rich and strangely comforting. The repetitive motion, the soft leather under your fingertips, the hum of voices in the background, it all settles you. The tools you oiled earlier are now placed back in their spots. The axe you helped repair is tested on a log with a satisfying thunk. You feel oddly proud, like you've left your mark. That night, over a meal of dried fish, root mash, and warm ale, the others talk about a neighboring farm whose roof caved in during a storm. No one was hurt, but they'll have to share lodging now. The gossip rolls on while someone stitches a torn mitten with sinew thread, and another boils pine needles for tea, rich in vitamin C, someone mutters, though no one calls it that yet. You sink into the furs, mind heavy but clear. The cold is still out there. The chores are never done. But the fire is lit, the tools are sharp, and your roof doesn't leak. You've learned that survival isn't always about bravery or battles. Sometimes it's about patching something before it breaks. About fixing, tending, maintaining. You drift off as snow taps softly against the roof you helped mend. You wake to a strange hush. It's the kind of silence that presses in on all sides, soft and eerie. You sit up, blink away sleep, and realize the world outside has been swallowed whole. Snow. Thick, endless snow, like someone shook a feather pillow over the entire village and forgot to stop. Welcome to a whiteout. You step outside the longhouse, and everything's different. The world is smaller, quieter. Even sound seems muffled, caught in the swirling softness. A path has been trampled to the well, and another to the byre. But beyond that, just drift after drift of powdery white. Trees bend under the weight. The horizon, gone. It's beautiful and terrifying. You realize this snowstorm isn't just a nuisance. It's an event. It changes the rules. For the Vikings, snow like this meant lockdown. Not in the modern streaming and snacks way, but in the don't get lost and die in a snowbank way. Even stepping a few meters off a known path could turn into a disaster. The snow covers everything: fences, footpaths, even tools left outside. It's a giant white eraser. Today's survival, skill, staying put, staying warm, and staying sane. Inside, the longhouse feels different too. People speak in hushed tones. Fires are fed constantly. Blankets and cloaks are repurposed into window coverings. Someone seals a drafty wall joint with clay and straw. You find yourself helping to twist straw into makeshift insulation ropes. The doors are barricaded with logs, not out of fear but practicality. Wind can find any crack. Historians still argue whether Viking communities saw these whiteouts as holy events, moments when the gods were reshaping the land, or just annoying seasonal hazards. Either way, they prepared for them with near paranoid care. You get your first lesson in indoor snowstorm survival. Sweat, high, and death. It's drilled into you by every adult in earshot. If you get too hot from activity, your clothes will trap moisture. That moisture will freeze. And then, well, you'll become a very cozy statue. So you learn to move slowly, to balance warmth with ventilation. And you discover layers matter. Fine wool closest to your skin, thicker tunics on top, fur-lined cloaks for when you go near the doors. It's like dressing for battle, but against the air itself. Meals shift too. Today it's porridge. Barley thickened with milk and drizzled with honey that's been melted near the fire. You eat it with your fingers because the wooden spoon is frozen to the table. Someone passes around dried berries from the fall harvest, and you pop them into your mouth like candy. They're chewy, sour, and oddly delicious. Quirky moment of the day. You notice one of the elders tying tiny amulets around door handles. Little carvings of Thor's hammer, rune-inscribed beads, even a doll made of straw. For luck, she says with a shrug. You're not sure if it's superstition or insurance, but in weather like this, you'll take both. The livestock are cranky. You help muck the byre, which is warm with body heat and smells like, well, cows. The snowstorm has stressed the animals. A goat kicks over a water bucket. A sheep bleats like it's auditioning for a horror film. You calm them with a mixture of hay, murmured lullabies, and a lot of trial and error. By late afternoon, everyone is engaged in the one indoor activity you hadn't expected: storytelling. Turns out, snowstorms are when the real epics come out. Fridas. Yes, that Fridas leans against the hearth and starts telling the saga of a sea giant who tried to drink the ocean and accidentally flooded Norway. It's equal parts thrilling and ridiculous. Every few sentences, someone interrupts with a correction or an insult. That's not how the whale bit his leg. You forgot the Thunderbirds again. You realize stories are more than entertainment. Here. Their warmth. They knit people together when the outside world vanishes. They keep memory alive when the horizon can't even be seen. Some of the stories are family tales, of winters past, of near misses and dumb choices. One old man laughs so hard at his own story, he spills ale down his tunic and doesn't even care. Historians still debate how accurate Viking sagas were. Some argue they were oral history, meticulously preserved. Others say they were more like long-form improv with occasional bursts of realism. Judging by today's performance, you're voting improv. Later, you take part in a group chore that feels surprisingly cozy. Mending wool socks, yes, socks. You sit in a circle with others, darning. Holes using bone needles and bright thread. Someone even embroiders a tiny wolf head into the toe. Fashion meets function, 9th century edition. Outside, the wind howls again, louder this time. Someone checks the door and returns with snow stuck to their eyebrows. Drifts waist deep, they announce. Everyone groans, and someone passes. The honeypot. You wonder how long it'll last. Hours? Days? But no one seems panicked. They've done this before. They've hunkered down, shared heat and stories, and waited for the storm to pass. It's not easy, but it's known. That makes it survivable. You settle in near the fire, wrapped in fur, wool socks now perfectly mended. You're sipping pine needle. Tea. Listening to the boy with the rope trying his hand at a saga of his own. It's terrible. Everyone loves it. The whiteout rages on, but inside, the world is warm, soft, and full of laughter. You close your eyes to the crackle of the hearth, and the sound of another wild tale beginning. The storm finally relents, leaving behind a world that's been utterly transformed. You step outside and blink against the bright glare. The snow reflects the sun like 1,000 tiny mirrors, making the whole landscape almost painfully white. You squint, pull your fur cloak tighter, and start to explore the aftermath. Walking through the village, you notice the heavy work that begins once the snow melts, or rather, compacts and shifts. Paths need digging out, roofs need clearing, and the livestock, well, they're all eager for a taste of fresh grass, but it's buried under layers of ice and frost. Your first task is to help clear the main road. It's a communal effort, and you're handed a wooden shovel. A surprisingly sturdy tool carved from a single piece of ash. You begin scraping and throwing snow to the sides, muscles aching but mind drifting pleasantly into the rhythm. The sound of the shovel scraping against packed snow and ice fills the crisp morning air. You work alongside others, swapping jokes about the snow gods and how they must be terrible at hide-and-seek. One older woman calls out a story about a past winter when the snow was so deep they had to live off seal meat for weeks. Definitely a tale for another night. In your brief break, you notice something odd. Tiny red berries poking out from under a bush. They're bright, almost cheerful amid the white. Someone tells you they're lingonberries, which Vikings used not just for food but also in rituals and medicine. You pop one in your mouth. It's tart and fresh, a small surprise gift from the thawing earth. Historians still debate whether Vikings had a systematic approach to medicinal plants, or if most remedies were trial and error passed down by word of mouth. Either way, you're fascinated by how even the smallest details mattered. Later, you join a group inspecting the longhouse roof. Snow and ice have left their mark, and a few patches of sod have slipped or collapsed. You help with lifting sod and repositioning turf, your hands cold but nimble. Someone else has the job of scraping off ice, thick, slippery, and stubborn. You joke that you're officially Viking janitors now, but no one laughs. This is serious business. In between chores, there's time to examine the tools left out in the snow. You find a wooden spear shaft half buried and frostbitten, and a leather pouch stiff and cracked from the cold. Someone demonstrates how to oil leather with animal fat to keep it supple, reminding you of the importance of maintenance in this environment. Your attention is drawn to a curious bundle tied with sinew, a snowshoe repair kit. Vikings used snowshoes to traverse deep snow without sinking, crafted from bent wood and stretched animal hide. They're lightweight, durable, and ingenious. A perfect example of survival innovation. As you help stitch torn bindings, the group talks about trading routes reopening after winter. The promise of exotic goods and news from distant lands stirs excitement, but also caution. Winter travel was perilous, and you wonder what dangers lie beyond the familiar woods. Dinner that night is simple but hearty. Salted fish, root vegetables, and a broth spiced with wild herbs. The smell of burning pine resin fills the air as the hearth crackles. Stories resume, and you catch snippets about explorers and warriors, farmers and traders, all part of the Viking saga you're living firsthand. The night air outside is clear, and the stars shine fiercely. You step out briefly, breathe in the cold, and marvel at the vastness. It's a reminder of how small you are, how vast the world is, and how connected you've become to this moment in time. You head back inside, warmed by fire and company, feeling the slow, steady pulse of a community rebounding from the grip of winter. Morning breaks crisp and clear, a pale sun casting long shadows across the frosted fields. You awaken with a sense of purpose. Today is about hunting and gathering, the heartbeat of Viking sustenance beyond the longhouse walls. You bundle. Up again, the familiar weight of furs settling around your shoulders, and join a small group preparing their gear. Spears, bows, and knives are checked meticulously, each one a lifeline in the wilderness beyond. The forest calls. You trudge through snow-crusted underbrush, the crunch beneath your boots, the only sound besides the occasional call of a raven. Your breath clouds the air in short bursts, your muscles warming against the cold as you move deeper into the wild. Hunting in Viking times wasn't just sport, it was essential survival. Reindeer, elk, hares, they all filled stomachs and supplied hides, sinew, and bones for tools. But you quickly learn, this is a game of patience. You crouch behind a snow-laden pine, fingers numb but steady, eyes scanning for movement. After a tense hour, a flash of brown darts between trees, a young stag. The group signals silently, raising bows and readying spears. You hold your breath as arrows fly, some whistling past, one striking true. The stag stumbles and falls. There's no celebration, only quiet respect. The animal's life is given freely, and you are reminded of your place in the cycle. Back at camp, butchering and preserving follow, a skilled choreography of knife work and careful storage. Meat is salted and dried, hides stretched and scraped. You help stretch a skin over a frame, marveling at how raw materials transform into useful items. A quirky fact emerges. Vikings sometimes used frozen fish as ice packs to preserve meat during warm spells. A rudimentary form of refrigeration. Ingenious, if a bit chilly. Historians still argue whether Viking hunters prioritized sustainable practices or if overhunting contributed to some regional wildlife declines. You ponder this as you listen to the quiet forest outside. Next comes foraging. You gather pine needles for tea rich in vitamin C, a necessary boost to stave off winter scurvy, and dig for wild roots beneath snow-softened earth. You find a small patch of moss, said to soothe wounds, and another of lichen that tastes like old socks, but apparently has medicinal uses. Later, you watch an elder demonstrate how to make a simple trap for small game using twigs and sinew. Patience and cunning involved fascinate you. It's a slow dance with nature, a silent conversation. By evening, you sit around the fire, the scent of smoked meat mixing with pine smoke. The day's labor has deepened your connection to this harsh but generous land. You're tired, but not in the way you expected. This exhaustion is earned, full of accomplishment and quiet wonder. As you drift toward sleep, you think about the animals, the forests, the ancient wisdom hidden in every twig and root. This is survival, woven with respect, grit, and the slow art of living well enough to face another dawn. You wake to the faint scent of smoke and pine, a reminder that even deep in winter, life pulses steadily here. Today is about connection with your fellow Vikings, with the wider world, and with the stories that keep the past alive. You're ushered toward the hearth, where a carved wooden bowl brims with dried fish and black bread. As you eat, a figure steps forward, an envoy from a neighboring settlement, wrapped in furs and dusted with snow. His arrival is quiet, but significant. Trade and news have arrived. Exchanging goods in the dead of winter might seem illogical, but for Vikings, these moments were vital. Rare salt, fine cloth, metalwork and stories traveled across frozen fjords and snowbound passes. Trade kept isolation at bay and tied distant communities together. You watch as the envoy unfolds small bundles, beads from the Byzantine Empire, fragments of glassware, and a thin strip of silk dyed a deep red. Each item carries a story, a faraway place you can only imagine. Historians still argue how extensive Viking trade networks were, especially during the harshest winters. Some say these exchanges were limited to nearby neighbors. Others believe they stretched far across continents, connecting cultures in unexpected ways. Quirky tidbit. Vikings sometimes repurposed foreign coins as jewelry or pendants, more for their exotic shine than monetary value. You fiddle with a small... After the trade, the conversation turns to news. Tales of battles, strange lands, and mysterious peoples ripple through the room. One elder recounts a recent journey south, describing towering stone structures and men who spoke in strange tongues and wore togas, Romans no less. The stories are part history, part legend, and entirely captivating. You notice how important storytelling is, not just as entertainment, but as a means of preserving information. Every word is a thread in a vast tapestry, connecting generations. Later, you join a group crafting new fishing nets from flax fibers. The rhythmic nodding feels like meditation, fingers moving almost automatically. You marvel at the engineering behind such simple tools. A mesh that lets fish in but keeps them from escaping. Someone jokes about how their nets once caught an entire flock of seagulls instead of fish, causing a chaotic morning that still sparks laughter. The day ends with a communal meal, richer than usual thanks to traded spices and dried fruits. The firelight dances across faces worn but smiling. You feel part of something bigger, a network of people bound by necessity, curiosity, and a fierce will to survive. As you settle in for the night, you think about those distant lands, the coins, and the stories. This connection to the world, beyond your snowy home, is a lifeline, fragile but vital. You drift off with the warmth of shared history surrounding you, ready for whatever tomorrow brings. The morning sun barely warms the frozen earth as you prepare for another vital task. Boat maintenance. The Viking longship isn't just a vessel, it's a lifeline, a symbol of power and freedom, and the key to raids, trade, and exploration. You join the shipwrights at the dock, where the longship rests on wooden supports, its sleek hull gleaming, faintly beneath frost. The air smells of salt, tar, and fresh-cut timber, a strangely comforting blend. The winter has been harsh on the ship, and you're here to help keep it seaworthy. Your first job, inspecting the hull for cracks or damage from ice. Running your hands along the planks, you feel the rough grain and spots where water might sneak in. Using pitch heated over a fire, you help seal the gaps. It's sticky, hot work, and you try not to spill it on your clothes or your skin. Historians still argue how often Vikings replaced entire ships versus repairing them, but either way, maintenance was constant. One small leak could turn a glorious voyage into a watery grave. A quirky fact: Vikings sometimes used a mixture of animal fat and crushed charcoal as waterproofing, a primitive but effective sealant. You squint at the black paste, wondering if it tastes as bad as it smells. You climb aboard the deck and help lash loose rigging. The ropes are rough and heavy, made from hemp and animal sinew. You learn the intricate knots that hold sails and oars in place, and how every knot has a purpose, some practical, some superstitious. Sailors believed certain knots brought luck or safe passage. As you work, the shipwrights share stories of past voyages, crossing raging seas, evading storms, and encountering strange peoples. One older man speaks of a journey to Iceland's icy shores, describing glaciers that looked like mountains of glass, and nights that never seemed to end. You can almost feel the spray of cold seawater and taste the salt on your lips. Next, you help polish the dragonhead prow, a fierce symbol meant to ward off sea monsters and evil spirits. It's carved from oak, painted in faded reds and blacks, and worn smooth by years of exposure. Someone jokes it's more effective at scaring gulls than monsters. The group debates whether these figureheads were truly spiritual protections or just showy decorations meant to intimidate enemies. And, honestly, gulls. As the day fades, you Assist in storing the ship safely for winter, covering it with tarps and anchoring it against the wind. Watching the longship settle into rest, you realize it's more than wood and nails. It's a vessel carrying the hopes and fears of an entire culture. Dinner is served by the fire, smoked salmon, hearty stew, and rye bread warmed on stones. You eat while listening to the shipwrights sing sea shanties, songs full of longing, bravery, and, surprisingly, humor. You end the day feeling connected to the sea, the ship, and the vast unknown beyond the horizon. As you drift to sleep, the creak of the longship and the whisper of waves seem to follow you into dreams. The morning greets you with a subtle chill, the kind that lingers just long enough to remind you that spring is still a distant promise. Today, your focus shifts from the outside world to the inner life of the village. Craftsmanship, creativity, and the small comforts that make survival bearable. You step into the workshop, a cozy space warmed by a small fire and filled with the scent of pine shavings and beeswax. Here, artisans shape the raw materials harvested from the wild into tools, jewelry, and everyday items. Your hands itch to get to work. Your first task is helping carve a wooden comb, a surprisingly important item in Viking culture. Vikings prized grooming. A well-kept beard and clean hair weren't just about vanity. They were social signals of status and respectability. You run your fingers over the partially carved comb, imagining the skilled hands of its maker. A quirky fact. Vikings often crafted combs from reindeer antlers or bone, and some were so finely made they could double as tiny weapons in a pinch. You try to imagine combing your hair with something that might stab you. Historians still argue whether Viking grooming habits were universally adopted or varied widely by region and class. Either way, personal care was clearly valued. Next, you help an elder fashion a silver brooch using simple tools, hammers, anvils, and your own patience. These brooches fastened cloaks and told stories through intricate patterns inspired by nature, mythology, and the sea. You trace the twisting lines, fascinated by the symbolism. The workshop hums with quiet conversation. Someone explains how beads and jewelry also served as portable wealth, carried during travels or battles. The idea that something so small could hold so much power and meaning makes you think about modern equivalents, smartphones maybe, or credit cards. You assist in making leather strips for belts and straps, learning the delicate art of cutting, stretching, and dyeing. The leather is thick and strong but flexible enough to last. You joke about Vikings having better belts than most medieval kings. Later, you move to weaving. Vikings wove wool and linen into cloth on simple looms, a painstaking but rewarding process. You weave a small swatch, fingers awkward but determined, the rhythm oddly soothing. A fellow weaver tells you about Viking dyes, made from plants and minerals, which produced rich colors like deep reds, blues, and yellows. There's a strange satisfaction in knowing the colors you wear come from the earth itself. As evening falls, the village gathers for a feast celebrating a successful winter survival. The table groans under smoked fish, fresh bread, stews, and wild berries you helped gather earlier. Laughter mingles with music from a lyre, and stories rise and fall like waves. You reflect on the blend of hard work and creativity that keeps this community thriving. A balance between necessity and beauty. As you lay down, the faint scent of pine and beeswax lingers, and you feel, for a moment, not just like a survivor,